Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of your hosts for Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this week's episode, we discuss a question that comes up from our work with schools, namely, how can schools be firm and fair when parents are upset? When you listen to this, I'm sure you'll appreciate, as I do, that it's not helpful to say stuff like calm down or even just to talk down to a parent. It's important to learn and study more about working with parents who are upset because it can help you figure out what you can do to help and support students to attend school. If you currently are dealing with parents who are, as Steve puts it in the podcast, coming in hot, then this episode is for you because it can help you to have a plan to listen without blaming. We talk about things like de-escalating first, using open-ended questions that don't blame parents, model and practice again because it's something that everyone can learn or improve upon. At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find lots of free restorative resources. Sign up and subscribe on YouTube to Circle Forum. And now let's head over to the conversation with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. When parents are in difficult situations, how do we deal with them in ways that are firm and fair, even through difficult conversations, even through them being very upset, without blaming them?
I think to start with, when the question was coming from, how do I have a firm and fair conversation with a parent who's upset? The first place is you're probably not going to have that conversation firm but fair, or anyway, any kind of conversation in that moment. When somebody's that escalated, that upset, you need to de-escalate first the situation before you're even having a conversation. I mean, when we think what we do with students, and it often happens with parents who are escalated as well, as we repeat expectations, or we can't speak like that in here, and we do those kind of things. That is not a way to engage anybody, and you're certainly not going to move to having any kind of conversation. So I think before you move to firm but fair conversations or working with parents, is that you need to de-escalate the conversation.
So, what are some specifics of the language that you would use? So, a parent is really upset. You want to de escalate. What would be some of the actual words you might use?
You're not going to say, first of all, calm down, because
Just
that has
thinking the
never
same
worked
thing. I was just
anywhere
thinking
in
the
the
same thing.
Calm down, Shelley, and just give me an answer here.
Yeah.
So you're not going to do that, but you are going to listen. You're going to acknowledge, and that may be with head nodding, and let people speak. You're not going to interrupt them. You can be clear that you won't be verbally attacked if that seems okay in the moment, but you might have to shoulder a little bit of that too in private. But I would let them know that I hear you have concerns. And so you're just letting them know that you're hearing them. You may not in that moment get to the let's have the conversation or addressing that. But when somebody feels that they're at least being heard and they have nothing to argue back with, things are going to de-escalate. And that they will come down when you authentically seem ready to listen to them.
Steve, what actual words would you use with a parent that
Yeah, it's
comes
easy
in that way?
it's easy to make that list of what not to say. Is like, don't make it come down. But a lot of it is that paraphrasing. When Shelley was just talking about listening to them, it's a listening, and listening well is a skill. And sometimes it's that paraphrasing. I hear you're pretty upset. What I hear you saying is, and sometimes that can sound very contrived, but
Yes,
there's
you
a
have to be
way to
careful.
do it in a way that isn't contrived. Simply just saying back, repeating back what might be upsetting to them. And as you say, you may not even be talking about the actual reason you're getting together. They may be angry about a number of different things. So listen very carefully to what they're saying. And as you say, don't interrupt them. But if they are getting abusive, then you have to be fairly calm and say, you know what, that's not the kind of language we're going to accept here. Specifically, you can say to them, it's the questions you ask, not what you say. So it's about questioning, that Socratic method. And tell me what happened, and then what happened after that, and how did that make you feel? And you're working your way through all those restorative questions. You're not coming up with an answer for them necessarily, but it's that Socratic method of leading them towards possibly an understanding or greater understanding of what they need to do. You're not taking over the conversation, because sometimes a parent comes in hot and the person receiving it can also start to escalate. And all of a sudden you're into these two people butting heads and nobody's winning. The, the volume could get higher and higher. And then that's when a third party has to step in. Is there something I can do to help here? Sometimes I've said to parents, this might not be the best time to have this conversation. I see that you're very upset about this. Maybe let's try and set a better time or another time. Or do you want to just sit down in my office? Let's go to my office. Why don't you have a sit there for 5 or 10 minutes and I'll come back in. And you give them that time to almost de-escalate on their own before you come back and say, let's have this conversation. But it's a skill. It's not something that comes naturally to everybody. Some people it does, but it's a real skill, and it's something that you can work with staff to learn on how to listen and how to question and how to keep your voice in a non-threatening manner, but still not sound like you're condescending.
So what Steve's talking about there is also paying your tone of voice, paying attention to your body language, your facial pieces, because there's a thing called co-regulation. So if you're going to continue to be up here, they're going to come up here and meet with you, and they're already ready there. So you really have to regulate yourself, which then the person that you're with will start to co-regulate. If you're remaining calm, you're giving options somewhere to have a seat. Do you need a moment? But it's all done in a calm way, not condescending, and certainly not your voice raising to be heard more than them. Then that's going to start to de-escalate.
And I think the more we can model this with the staff, with other teachers, the more they can practice it. They can have somebody sitting beside them, maybe at a parent-teacher conference. The better everybody will get at this once they start to see what it really means to listen to understand, as opposed to listen to reply, which is what most of North Americans do. They tend to listen to reply as opposed to listen to understand. And to me, then, the idea of working with is being both firm and fair. And part of that is the fair process, right? Which means you have to engage them. And if you go right away to explaining without engaging, you've suddenly gone off the rails with the fair process. So some of the language, I think, and some of the overall approach needs to make sure that you're giving people to have an opportunity to have a say, engaging them and explaining when you've had them go right to the very end of their story, because often that's something that we don't do. We don't listen all the way to the end. And sometimes in situations where I've had conflicts with people, I've had a preamble. I need you to listen to this right to the very end. And so then that's a little marker. You could even say that to someone, like, I want to listen to this story right to the very end. So you tell me when it's the end, before you go into explaining. And then talk about expectation clarity. So from here, this is what we will do together.
All the stuff that we've just talked about here doesn't even get into the original question about having the conversation, a firm but fair conversation. What we're talking about is the part of that question that talks about an upset parent. So I hope what you're hearing is that the work needs to go in the upfront part of de-escalation and having people feel that they're being heard before you can move to a firm but fair conversation. We're moving to the with box. So just to think that you're going to go right there when you've got somebody who's upset, you need to do that upfront work first.
What are we going to do? Using the we word carries a lot more weight than what are you going to do? Because it's not all about one person or the other. And so you still have to listen very carefully and follow along almost in an order of what's the situation? What's happened? What do we need to do to make it better? How do you feel about that? And is that possible? One of the biggest drawbacks you can have when teachers or administrators are talking with parents is using edge-speak and making sure the language you're using is something that they understand, and don't use all the acronyms and edge-speak that we sometimes use. You'll see that glazed look in a parent's eyes when you throw out an acronym that we all use every day. They haven't got a clue. So you have to really listen and give them the opportunity to ask. They might feel intimidated to say, I'm not sure what that you just said there, and that you may let it go. So I always purposely try to put myself in the place of the parent when these conversations are going, especially if there's a group of people in a room and somebody will throw out an acronym and I might just stop and say, Do you know what that means? No, I don't. Well, that it means this and this. Okay, now and let's move on.
And the other thing I want to caution around firm but fair and working with, just because we're having a firm but fair conversation, it's the with parts that's really important. Firm but fair does not mean it's to make it go our way or what I want happening. I'm having a firm but fair conversation, so therefore this is what will happen. That is not the meaning behind that. It really is about the with part. And guess what? My firm but my expectations may have to shift a little bit because I'm hearing something different.
And I think, too, it's important to be open to the fact that things could be different than they appear to you when someone's coming in to see you. Be open, be curious, ask questions. I think those are some of the key things around dealing with parents. And as long as you're asking these kinds of restorative questions to me, that moves you out of that blaming and into the with. Working with parents in difficult situations is a skill that can be learned through practice and through modeling. It starts with a fair process that has engagement, gives parents an opportunity to have a say. Explanation gives everyone a shared understanding of the why behind a decision or action. Expectation clarity, there's a shared understanding of what's expected in the future. You can find out more about this on our website, www.restorative.ca. Send me an email, stan@restorative.ca, and let's practice asking first in order to be quick to listen and slow to speak.